The ice clinks in Victoria Reed's glass a second before her hand cracks across 8-year-old Marcus's face. First class freezes, but Solomon, America's first black trillionaire and Sky Blue Airlines' largest shareholder, sees an opening. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispers, already calculating the airline's imminent downfall. Nobody moved. Not the other flight attendants. Not the shocked passengers clutching their drinks. Not even the air seemed to circulate. Marcus's father, Solomon Washington, America's first black trillionaire, slowly lowered his phone, his eyes darkening with quiet rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered, his finger already dialing. Victoria smirked, not realizing her 20-year aviation career had just ended, along with something much greater than she could possibly imagine. How could one impulsive slap reveal a conspiracy that would shake America's corporate world to its core? Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against injustice and exposing prejudice, smash that like button and subscribe for more eye-opening true stories that rarely make mainstream news. Solomon Washington adjusted his custom Italian suit as he guided his children, 8-year-old Marcus and 12-year-old Zara, down the jet bridge towards Sky Blue Airlines' flagship aircraft. Despite owning a fleet of private jets, Solomon occasionally flew commercial to stay connected with everyday experiences. His newest tech innovation had just pushed his net worth past the $1 trillion mark, making headlines as America's first black trillionaire. Marcus bounced excitedly, clutching his favorite action figure, while Zara walked confidently beside her father, already showing the poise that would one day make her a formidable businesswoman in her own right. As they reached the aircraft door, flight attendant Victoria Reed's welcoming smile instantly vanished when she saw them. Her eyes narrowed, scanning their designer clothes with unconcealed suspicion. "Economy boarding is from the rear entrance," she said sharply, not even bothering to look at their tickets. Solomon calmly held up 3 first-class boarding passes. "We're in seats 2A through C." Victoria snatched the passes, examining them as if searching for forgeries. She reluctantly stepped aside with a tight-lipped, "Very well," muttering just loud enough to be heard. "They'll let anyone up here with points these days." As the Washingtons made their way to their seats, Solomon noticed the stark contrast in treatment. A white family in expensive but less refined clothing was greeted warmly, offered pre-flight champagne, and had their bags expertly stowed by the same attendant who had barely acknowledged his family's existence. "Daddy, why was that lady mean?" Marcus whispered, his innocent eyes confused. "Some people judge books by their covers, son," Solomon answered quietly, helping his children settle in. He'd built his empire by noticing patterns others missed, and he immediately began mentally documenting each interaction, each subtle slight. This wasn't his first encounter with discrimination, despite his wealth. Money might have bought him access to exclusive spaces, but it couldn't buy respect from those who refused to see past his skin color. As other passengers boarded, Solomon reflected on his journey from the struggling Brooklyn neighborhood where he grew up. His single mother had worked 3 jobs to keep him in a decent school where his mathematical genius had eventually earned him scholarships. Even with degrees from MIT and Stanford, venture capitalists had initially refused to fund his startups until a blind submission process finally gave his innovations a chance. Each step had required 10 times the effort of his white counterparts. Victoria purposely avoided their section during pre-takeoff service. When she finally approached, she addressed the white businessman across the aisle first, then the elderly couple behind them, before reluctantly turning to the Washingtons. "Anything to drink before takeoff?" she asked flatly. "Apple juice, please," Marcus requested politely, using the manners his father had carefully instilled. Victoria's eyes rolled slightly. She turned to another flight attendant and said loudly, "These people always cause extra work. Watch them ask for the entire beverage cart." Solomon maintained his dignity, his face impassive despite the burning indignation he felt. Zara squeezed his hand, her young face showing she understood exactly what was happening. When Victoria returned, she carelessly thrust the drink toward Marcus. The plastic cup tipped, spilling cold water across Solomon's lap and onto his $5,000 suit. "Oh," Victoria said without a hint of apology. "Your son should be more careful when grabbing things." Solomon calmly pressed the call button. A male flight attendant named Michael Pierce arrived. his senior rank indicated by the additional stripes on his uniform. "Is there a problem?" Michael asked, his eyes darting between Victoria's smug expression and Solomon's soaked pants. "Your colleague deliberately spilled water on me and then blamed my 8-year-old son," Solomon explained calmly. Michael's face hardened. "Sir, I'm sure it was an accident. These things happen during turbulence. We're still at the gate," Zara pointed out. Michael's eyes narrowed at the child who dared speak up. "I assure you, none of our staff would intentionally do such a thing. Perhaps you're being a bit sensitive." The implication hung in the air. Solomon recognized the unified front forming against his family. He'd seen it countless times in boardrooms and country clubs before his success had become too substantial to ignore. He pulled out his phone and began typing notes, including names and times. This subtle action caused both flight attendants to exchange nervous glances before they retreated to the galley. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Solomon watched Victoria laugh with their colleagues while gesturing toward his family. He knew from decades of experience that this flight was going to be problematic, but he had no idea just how significantly it would change all their lives in the hours to come. As the plane climbed through turbulent air, little Marcus Washington whimpered softly, his small hands pressing against his ears. Solomon knew his son's condition well. This wasn't a tantrum, but genuine pain from pressure changes affecting his sensitive eardrums. He fished in his bag for the special eardrops the pediatrician had prescribed. But before he could administer them, Victoria's sharp voice cut through the cabin. "That child needs to stop making a scene," she announced loudly. "This is first class, not a playground." Solomon noticed a white family across the aisle, whose toddler was crying much more loudly. Victoria was already there, cooing sympathetically and offering warm towels and candy to help with ear pressure. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more public. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently based solely on their appearance? Comment number 1. If you've experienced discrimination firsthand or seen it happen to others, if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin color or background, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories that expose injustice. Zara, wise beyond her 12 years, stood up and addressed Victoria politely. "Excuse me, ma'am. My brother has a medical condition. He's not being disruptive on purpose." Victoria's face contorted with anger at being challenged by a child, especially a black child in what she clearly considered her domain. She placed her hand firmly on Zara's shoulder and pushed her roughly back into her seat. "Your kind need to learn your place," she hissed low enough that only the Washington family could hear. "If you can't control your children, perhaps you shouldn't bring them into adult spaces." Solomon felt his heart pound with controlled rage as he witnessed his daughter being manhandled. He discreetly positioned his phone to record the escalating situation while comforting both his children. Several passengers had noticed the commotion, but most studiously avoided eye contact, their silence a familiar form of complicity he'd encountered throughout his life. However, one elderly white woman seated nearby, Beverly Matthews, a retired principal, cleared her throat loudly. "Young lady," Beverly addressed Victoria, "I believe your behavior toward these children is completely inappropriate. I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Victoria's professional mask slipped entirely as she turned to Beverly. "Ma'am, I'll be serving your section last now since you want to involve yourself in matters that don't concern you." The threat was clear, and it expanded the circle of Victoria's targeted mistreatment. Solomon nodded appreciatively to Beverly, who responded with a knowing look that communicated volumes about witnessing injustice and refusing to stay silent. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Marcus whispered urgently to his father that he needed to use the bathroom. Solomon pressed the call button, but Victoria ignored it for nearly 10 minutes before stomping over. "Yes," she asked impatiently. "My son needs to use the restroom," Solomon explained. Victoria gestured to the illuminated sign overhead. "The seatbelt sign might come back on at any moment. He'll have to wait." Not 30 seconds later, a white boy approximately Marcus's age stood up from his seat and headed toward the bathroom. Victoria smiled warmly at him as he passed. The boy's father hadn't even needed to ask permission. "What would you do if you witnessed such blatant double standards happening right in front of you? Would you speak up like Beverly or remain silent like most of the other passengers? What do you think happens next in this escalating situation that would lead to an entire flight crew losing their jobs? Stay tuned as the tension builds to a shocking breaking point. Solomon stood up, his imposing 6'3" frame commanding attention without raising his voice. My son will be using the restroom now, just like that child is. I'm also going to need your full name and employee ID number. Victoria's face flushed with anger. Are you threatening me? I'm documenting a pattern of discriminatory behavior, Solomon replied calmly, helping Marcus out of his seat. There's a difference. As Marcus made his way to the bathroom, Victoria pulled out her phone. Keep this up, and I'll make sure security meets the plane. We don't tolerate disruptive passengers regardless of who they think they are. The threat hung in the air as Solomon guided Marcus past her. He'd built an empire by recognizing when to fight and when to strategize. Right now he was doing both, collecting evidence while protecting his children. Victoria had no idea she wasn't dealing with just any passenger, but with a man whose strategic brilliance had revolutionized 3 different industries and broken barriers previously thought impenetrable. What she also didn't know was just how catastrophically her next actions would change the trajectory of everyone on that flight. 2 hours into the transcontinental flight, the first-class cabin filled with the aroma of seared filet mignon and truffle risotto. As meal service began, passengers in the first few rows received their carefully plated lunches on fine china with proper silverware, a hallmark of Sky Blue's premium service. Victoria moved methodically through the cabin, serving everyone with practiced efficiency until she reached the Washington family's row. We're out of the beef option, she announced flatly, despite Solomon having clearly heard her confirm with the previous passenger that both options remained available. The chicken is fine, Solomon replied, maintaining his composure as he'd learned to do through decades of similar treatment. When the meals finally arrived 20 minutes after everyone else had been served, Marcus's chicken was visibly cold. The sauce congealed unappetizingly on the plate. Zara's vegetarian meal was missing several components that the identical meal across the aisle included. Solomon's food appeared to have been deliberately messed with, though he couldn't prove it. Marcus looked down at his plate, then at the dessert cart being brought around that contained chocolate cake slices. His disappointment was evident, but he'd been raised to speak up politely when something wasn't right. Excuse me, Marcus said in his small voice as Victoria passed with the dessert cart. I think my dessert is missing. Victoria spun around, her face instantly hardening. There's no dessert with the children's meal. But everyone else got cake, Marcus pointed out, gesturing to the other child passenger, happily eating a large slice. Are you calling me a liar? Victoria's voice rose sharply. Or are you just trying to get free food? Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. A businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. The boy is right. All the meal services include dessert according to the menu. Stay out of this, Victoria snapped at him before turning back to Marcus. This is exactly the kind of behavior I'd expect. Marcus, fighting back tears at the public scolding, reached hesitantly toward his father's untouched cake, seeking comfort in the small pleasure. Victoria's hand shot out like a viper, slapping Marcus's small fingers with enough force to leave an angry red mark across his knuckles. Don't touch what isn't yours, she hissed. The cabin fell deadly silent. Several passengers gasped. Marcus's eyes welled with tears of pain and humiliation, but he fought to maintain his composure as his father had taught him. Solomon remained still, his face betraying nothing, while his mind calculated his next move with the precision that had made him a business legend. You hurt me, Marcus whispered, a single tear escaping despite his best efforts. Something in Victoria snapped at this simple statement of fact. Perhaps it was the calm dignity of a child she'd expected to crumble into a tantrum. Perhaps it was the increasingly disapproving looks from other passengers. Whatever the trigger, her hand lashed out again, this time striking Marcus across his cheek with an audible crack that echoed through the silent cabin. Don't you dare accuse me of anything, you spoiled brat, she spat. Time seemed to stop. A woman gasped. Someone's drink tumbled to the floor. Marcus sat frozen in shock, the red imprint of an adult hand blooming across his small face. Solomon Washington had faced discrimination, barriers, and outright hostility throughout his meteoric rise from Brooklyn housing projects to becoming America's first black trillionaire. He had always responded with strategic precision rather than reactive emotion. This disciplined approach had built his empire and broken countless barriers. But he had never before witnessed someone physically assault his child. With deliberate calm that belied the fury coursing through him, Solomon pulled out his phone and pressed a number on speed dial. Victoria watched with a smug expression, clearly expecting him to call customer service, where his complaint would disappear into corporate oblivion. Gregory. Solomon spoke quietly into the phone, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. It's Solomon. I'm on Sky Blue Flight 1857 from New York to Los Angeles. I need you to contact Chairman Rivera immediately. A flight attendant named Victoria Reed just physically assaulted Marcus twice. I have it on video. Victoria's smirk faltered slightly, but she maintained her confident stance. Sir, you aren't allowed to make calls during flight, she said loudly for the benefit of nearby passengers. And we don't appreciate passengers trying to name drop or make threats. Solomon simply held her gaze as he continued speaking into the phone. Yes, I'll hold for the chairman. Then to Victoria, he added quietly, you have no idea what you've just done. Victoria rolled her eyes, clearly believing Solomon was bluffing. She had dealt with difficult passengers claiming connections before. She had no way of knowing that Solomon Washington owned 22% of Sky Blue Airlines' parent company, or that Chairman Rivera had personally courted his investment during the airline's financial troubles 2 years earlier. As Victoria strutted away, whispering to her colleagues and casting disdainful looks back at the Washington family, Solomon gently tended to his son's wrined face and hand. The quiet dignity with which this powerful man comforted his injured child stood in stark contrast to Victoria's uncontrolled rage. Several passengers were now openly recording the situation on their phones, their earlier reluctance to get involved evaporating after witnessing the unconscionable physical assault of a child. What none of them yet realized was that this moment would trigger a cascade of events that would expose not just one flight attendant's racism, but an entire corporate conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of America's business elite. Solomon Washington cradled his son Marcus close, whispering reassurances while pressing a cool napkin against the child's reddened cheek. Zara, displaying the protective instinct of an older sister, held her brother's hand and glared defiantly toward the galley where Victoria had retreated with her colleagues. The cabin remained unnaturally quiet, passengers processing the shocking scene they had just witnessed, an unformed airline employee striking an 8-year-old child. In the galley, Victoria showed no remorse as she huddled with lead flight attendant Michael Pierce and 2 other crew members. Their conversation, though hushed, was clearly audible to several nearby passengers. Can you believe the nerve? Victoria scoffed, adjusting her uniform smugly, acting like he's somebody important, threatening to call the chairman. Please. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the Washington family. Vic, do you know who that is? Some rich guy who thinks the rules don't apply to his bratty kids? Victoria replied dismissively. That's Solomon Washington, Michael whispered urgently, the tech billionaire. Actually, I think he's worth even more now. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Victoria's face, quickly replaced by hardened resolve. So what? These people always play the race card when they don't get special treatment. I've been flying first class for 20 years. Nothing's going to happen. Back in his seat, Solomon continued his phone conversation, his voice measured and calm despite the circumstances. Marcus had stopped crying but remained pressed against his father's side, the child's usual exuberance thoroughly crushed. Nearby passengers alternated between pretending to mind their own business and casting sympathetic glances toward the family. Exactly 22 minutes after Solomon's call, the plane's intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. I've just received instructions from our operations center to divert to Denver International Airport for an unscheduled landing due to an administrative matter. We should be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. We apologize for any inconvenience. A confused murmur spread through the cabin. Victoria emerged from the galley, her face flushed, but her stance defiant as she approached the Washington family once more. I hope you're happy, she said, leaning down towards Solomon, inconveniencing everyone with your complaints. Solomon regarded her calmly. The only person responsible for this situation is you, Miss Reed. Oh, please, Victoria sneered loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. You people always think you're being targeted. Maybe if you taught your children some manners instead of playing the race card every time someone corrects their behavior, we wouldn't be in this situation. Several passengers inhaled sharply at the unmistakable racial comment. Beverly, the elderly woman who had spoken up earlier, activated her call button immediately. Victoria ignored it, her attention fixed on Solomon. I know what you're doing, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with contempt. Recording everything, trying to get a big settlement. Well, it won't work. I have rights too, and I'm documenting your disruptive behavior. Solomon remained stone-faced, still on his phone call, though not speaking. Victoria misinterpreted his silence as submission or perhaps fear of her threats. Hand over your phone, she demanded suddenly. Recording crew members is against airline policy and federal aviation regulations. No, it isn't, came a voice from across the aisle, a middle-aged man who identified himself as an aviation attorney. Passengers are permitted to record their own experiences on aircraft, including interactions with crew. Victoria's face contorted with rage at this contradiction. I wasn't talking to you, she snapped before turning back to Solomon. The phone now. Solomon finally lowered his phone slightly. I'm currently speaking with Chairman Rivera of Sky Blue Airlines and Mr. Thornton, your CEO. They're both on the line and have been listening to this entire interaction. Would you like to speak with them? Victoria laughed derisively. Right. And I'm on the phone with the president. Your bluffs don't scare me. As if in response to her dismissal, every one of the crew phones in the galley began ringing simultaneously. Michael reluctantly answered one, his face draining of color as he listened to the voice on the other end. He gestured frantically for Victoria to join him. What? She demanded as she approached. It's the chief operating officer, Michael whispered, his hands shaking as he held out the phone. For you specifically. The smug expression finally faltered on Victoria's face, replaced momentarily by uncertainty before hardening into defiance. She snatched the phone, listening for just a few seconds before responding loudly. That's not what happened at all. They're lying. That child was being disruptive, and I simply... She stopped, listening again, her knuckles whitening around the phone. But you can't just... Don't I get a chance to... Hello? Hello? The Denver skyline came into view as the aircraft began its descent. Victoria stormed back to the Washington family, her professional demeanor completely abandoned. You think you've won, but you have no idea who you're messing with, she hissed at Solomon. I have friends. 2 powerful friends. Solomon finally broke his calm silence. Miss Reed, for your own sake, I suggest you stop talking immediately. As the plane touched down at Denver International, passengers were startled to see a veritable welcoming committee waiting on the tarmac through the aircraft windows. Not the usual ground crew, but what appeared to be airline executives in suits accompanied by airport security officers. Victoria maintained her confidence right until the jet bridge connected and the aircraft door opened. When the lead person, a woman in an impeccable suit with a sky blue executive badge, stepped aboard, Victoria stepped forward with a victorious smile. Thank goodness you're here. This passenger has been harassing me and making false accusations. I need him removed from the flight immediately. The executive didn't even glance at Solomon. Instead, she addressed the pilot. Captain Reynolds, I'm Diane Morales, Vice President of Flight Operations. I need your entire cabin crew to deplane immediately with your documentation. A replacement crew is standing by. Victoria's face crumpled in confusion. Wait, what? We're being deplaned. But what about them? She pointed accusingly at the Washington family. Ms. Reed, along with the rest of this cabin crew, is being removed from duty, the effective immediately pending investigation. Morales announced loud enough for all passengers to hear. Airport security will escort you to the administrative offices. As security officers stepped forward, Victoria's professional facade completely crumbled. This is ridiculous. They're lying. It's all because he's rich and black. This is reverse racism. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Victoria was escorted from the aircraft, still shouting accusations. Michael and the other crew members followed quietly, their faces ashen. Through the windows, first-class passengers could see a new crew approaching across the tarmac. Ladies and gentlemen, Morales addressed the cabin. On behalf of Sky Blue Airlines, I extend our sincerest apologies for this unfortunate incident and the delay in your journey. A new crew will be taking over to ensure your comfort for the remainder of your flight to Los Angeles. We will be providing compensation details before arrival. She then approached the Washington family directly, kneeling to eye level with Marcus. Young man, on behalf of our entire company, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. What happened was unacceptable and does not reflect our values. As the replacement crew boarded, bringing fresh meals and premium amenities for all passengers, Solomon Washington watched the proceedings with measured satisfaction. This immediate response was appropriate, but he knew from experience that systemic problems rarely had simple solutions. What none of the relieved passengers realized was that this incident was far from over. In the terminal, as they refueled and prepared for continuation to Los Angeles, Victoria broke away from her security escort. She sprinted toward the windows overlooking the aircraft, her face contorted with rage. She pounded on the glass, pointing at Solomon and shouting words that passengers couldn't hear, but could easily read on her lips racial slurs and threats that shocked even those who had witnessed her earlier behavior. Airport security quickly restrained her, but not before dozens of passengers had captured her tirade on their phones. As she was led away, Solomon made eye contact with her through the window. In that moment, Victoria Reed seemed to realize that her 20-year career had just ended. What she couldn't possibly know was that this was merely the first domino in a sequence that would ultimately expose corruption, reaching into the highest echelons of corporate America. The replacement crew served the Washington family with impeccable courtesy as the plane finally took off for Los Angeles. Yet Solomon's mind was already racing ahead, analyzing the incident not as an isolated case of discrimination, but as a data point in a larger pattern. His instincts, the same ones that had built his business empire, told him something more was happening beneath the surface. Victoria's parting threat about powerful friends hadn't been the desperate bluff of a terminated employee, but a warning he would soon discover was all too real. As Sky Blue Flight 1857 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, news crews were already assembled on the tarmac. Word of the incident had spread like wildfire across social media, with several passengers having sent videos to news outlets. During the Denver stopover, Solomon guided his children through the terminal. Marcus still subdued and holding tightly to his father's hand. Zara walking protectively on her brother's other side. Have you ever seen justice delivered swiftly when someone in power abuses their position? Comment number 1 if you believe companies should take immediate action against employees who discriminate. If you think more organizations need to stand firmly against racism, hit that like button and subscribe to see how this powerful story of accountability unfolds. Mr. Washington, can we get a statement about the incident? Reporters called out as the family approached the exit. Solomon raised a hand politely. My children have been through enough today. I have no comment at this time except to say that actions have consequences. His dignified response, captured on dozens of cameras, would become the defining soundbite of the unfolding story. As the Washington slipped into a waiting limousine, the scene at another part of the airport was dramatically different. Victoria Reed, still in her sky blue uniform, though now missing her company credentials, stormed through the employee exit where she had been formally processed for suspension. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her eyes burned with indignation rather than remorse. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted at the HR representative who had conducted her exit interview. 20 years of perfect service records and I'm suspended because some rich guy played the race card. The HR representative, a young black woman who had maintained professional composure throughout Victoria's increasingly hostile interview, simply replied, "M. Reed, the suspension is based on multiple passenger accounts and video evidence of you striking a minor. Race has nothing to do with our zero-tolerance policy on physical assault." Victoria's lawyer, James Whitfield, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and cold eyes, placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. "We'll be pursuing wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress claims," he informed the HR representative. "My client was simply maintaining order in a difficult situation." As they exited the building, Victoria was startled to see the Washington family's limousine pulling away from the adjacent terminal. Without warning, she broke from her lawyer's side and sprinted across the pickup lanes, narrowly avoiding oncoming cars as she raced toward the departing vehicle. "You think you can ruin me?" she screamed, pounding on the limousine's window as it slowed for a turn. "You people are all the same, using your money and playing victims." Inside the vehicle, Marcus shrank back against his father as the woman who had struck him continued her tirade, now including racial slurs that made Zara gasp. Solomon calmly pressed the button to record on his phone, capturing every word and gesture of Victoria's unhinged attack. Airport security officers quickly converged on the scene, pulling Victoria away from the vehicle. "You're making a scene, ma'am," one officer said firmly. "Do you know what he did to me?" Victoria shrieked, gesturing wildly at the limousine as it pulled away. "He got me fired over nothing because he's black and rich." The security officers exchanged glances as Victoria continued her rant, now incorporating more explicit racial language. Bystanders had their phones out recording everything. James Whitfield finally caught up, looking horrified at his client's public meltdown. "Victoria, stop talking immediately," he hissed, trying to guide her away from the growing crowd. But the damage was done. By nightfall, Victoria Reed's airport tirade would be trending across all social media platforms, with millions of views and thousands of comments condemning her explicitly racist language. The carefully crafted statement her lawyer had prepared, claiming misunderstanding and overreaction, was rendered completely ineffective by the unvarnished glimpse into her true attitudes. At Skyle headquarters, an emergency board meeting was convened. The company's CEO, Richard Thornton, looked grim as he addressed the assembled executives. "The videos are everywhere," he reported. "We've issued an immediate termination for Reed, and we're firing the entire crew that failed to intervene when she struck the child." "Isn't that excessive?" asked one board member. "The other crew members didn't actually do anything." "That's precisely the problem," Thornton responded. "They witnessed a child being racially abused and physically assaulted and did nothing. That's not who we are as a company." What Thornton didn't share with the board was the content of his earlier call with Solomon Washington, whose investment firm controlled enough Sky Blue stock to make or break the airline. Washington hadn't made threats or demands. Instead, he had simply asked one question: does Sky Blue consider child abuse and racial discrimination part of its brand identity? By evening, Sky Blue had released a statement confirming the termination of Victoria Reed and the entire first-class cabin crew, announcing a comprehensive review of their training protocols and pledging zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. The statement made headlines across all major news outlets, with commentators praising the swift response. What none of them knew was that Solomon Washington had already instructed his team to begin reviewing every contract his vast business Empire had with Sky Blue and its parent company, a portfolio worth over $200 million annually in corporate travel alone. As the Washingtons arrived at their bare estate, Solomon's phone rang with an update from his office. "Sir, Washington Innovations. Bug will be reevaluating our travel contracts as planned," his chief of staff reported. "But there's something else you should know. We're seeing an organized social media campaign starting to form around Victoria Reed. It doesn't look organic." Solomon thanked him and hung up, gazing thoughtfully at his children, who were finally relaxing in the safety of their home theater, the traumatic flight momentarily forgotten as they lost themselves in an animated film. He had hoped this would be a simple case of accountability for one person's reprehensible actions. His instincts told him it was about to become something much more complex and far more dangerous. What do you think will happen next? Will Victoria Reed accept her termination? Or is this just the beginning of a bigger battle? And who might be behind this organized social media campaign supporting someone caught on video assaulting a child? The real conspiracy is just starting to unfold. By the following morning, Acer's Sky Blue racism had become the top trending topic across all social media platforms. Video clips of Victoria Reed slapping Marcus Washington had been viewed over 50 million times, with the subsequent airport tirade reaching similar numbers. Public opinion seemed overwhelmingly against the former flight attendant, with most commenters expressing shock that such blatant discrimination could occur in 2025. But by mid-afternoon, a counter-narrative began emerging. Victoria Reed, freshly coiffed and dressed conservatively, appeared on national morning news, tears streaming down her face as she told a dramatically different version of events. "I have devoted my life to customer service," she sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. What they're not showing you is how disruptive that child was being, endangering other passengers by running in the aisles and throwing food. The interviewer, clearly sympathetic, nodded encouragingly. And you're saying the father, Solomon Washington, used his wealth and influence to have you fired without due process? Exactly, Victoria nodded vigorously. 20 years of perfect service records thrown away because someone powerful played the race card. What about my rights? What about the fact that I'm a single mother with a mortgage? No mention was made of the multiple videos clearly showing Marcus Washington seated quietly when Victoria struck him, nor of her racist tirade at the airport. Instead, the segment featured carefully selected photos of Victoria volunteering at community events and a testimonial from a former colleague praising her professionalism. Within hours of the interview, a new hashtag began trending, Stand with Victoria. The online conversation shifted dramatically with thousands of accounts suddenly sharing near-identical messages about reverse racism and canceled culture gone too far. A fundraiser for Victoria's legal defense collected over $100,000 in its first day. At Sky Blue headquarters, CEO Richard Thornton stared grimly at the social media analytics on his screen. "This is coordinated," he told his crisis management. "These aren't organic reactions." His phone rang with a number he recognized immediately. Solomon Washington. "I assume you're seeing what I'm seeing," Solomon said without preamble when Thornton answered. "Yes. We're not backing down from our decision, Solomon. The videos speak for themselves." "It's bigger than your airline now," Solomon replied. "My security team has identified bot networks amplifying her message. Someone with significant resources is backing her." As Solomon spoke, his personal assistant alerted him to breaking news. Washington Innovations had just lost a $50 million government contract that had been all but finalized the previous week. The official reason cited administrative reconsideration, but the timing was suspicious to say the least. Meanwhile, Marcus Washington had returned to his exclusive private school, the Alpine Academy. Solomon had notified the administration about the incident, expecting additional support for his traumatized son. Instead, the headmaster seemed strangely distant during their call, offering only perfunctory concern. Solomon now understood why when Zora called him from her classroom, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Dad, you need to come to school right now. The parents are saying horrible things to Marcus." Solomon arrived to find his son sitting alone in the headmaster's office, tears streaming silently down his face. The headmaster, Dr. Ellison, looked uncomfortable, but not particularly sympathetic. "Mr. Washington, there seems to be some disagreement among our parent community regarding the incident on your flight." "Disagreement?" Solomon echoed incredulously. "My son was physically assaulted by an airline employee. There is video evidence." Dr. Ellison shifted in his chair. "Several of our most prominent families believe the media coverage has been unfair to Ms. Reed. They feel your family's influence has distorted the story." "They're calling Marcus a liar," Zara interjected, "and saying, 'Dad only got where he is by playing the race card.'" "Young lady, that's not exactly what Dr. Ellison began." "It's exactly what the Davenport twins' mother said," Zara countered. "Right in the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear." Solomon's calm exterior masked his growing realization that what he was facing extended far beyond one flight attendant's actions. The coordinated nature of the backlash, the sudden contract cancellation, and now the school administration's thinly veiled hostility all pointed to something more systematic. "Dr. Ellison," Solomon said quietly, "are you suggesting my children are no longer welcome at Alpine Academy?" The headmaster's expression confirmed Solomon's suspicion before he even spoke. "Mr. Washington, perhaps it would be best for everyone if Marcus and Zara took some time away from campus until this media attention dies down." In other words, Solomon thought, protect the wealthy white families from the uncomfortable reality of racism rather than protect the black children actually experiencing it. It was a familiar pattern, just in a new setting. As the Washingtons left the school, reporters had somehow gathered at the gates. Solomon ushered his children into their waiting car as shouted questions followed them. "Mr. Washington, how do you respond to allegations that you fabricated the assault claims? Is it true you threatened to buy Sky Blue Airlines and fire everyone if Miss Reed wasn't terminated?" Did you offer Alpine Academy a donation to cover up your son's behavioral issues? The questions were so specifically targeted, so precisely aligned with Victoria Reed's narrative, that Solomon knew they couldn't be coincidental. Someone was orchestrating a comprehensive campaign to discredit him, and by extension, legitimate claims of racial discrimination. Back at his office, Solomon's suspicions were confirmed when his chief security officer showed him a disturbing pattern of activity. "These aren't just random supporters," she explained, pointing to a network diagram on her screen. Victoria Reed's social media campaign is being amplified by accounts connected to 3 major corporations that compete directly with your companies. One name in particular caught Solomon's attention: Whitfield and Associates. The law firm representing Victoria Reed was simultaneously representing these corporations in various matters. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be random. "There's more," his security chief continued. "James Whitfield has connections to several extremist groups classified as hate organizations. He's represented them pro bono in free speech cases." The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture more disturbing than a simple case of one flight attendant's racial bias. Solomon's phone buzzed with a news alert. Michael Pierce, the lead flight attendant from the Sky Blue flight, had released a statement claiming the video of Victoria slapping Marcus had been deceptively edited and that Solomon Washington had been the actual aggressor. The claim was absurd on its face. The unedited videos clearly showed the entire interaction, but Solomon knew from experience that the truth alone wasn't always enough when facing a coordinated disinformation campaign backed by powerful interests. As he contemplated his next steps, Solomon received another alert. 3 more major contracts with his companies had been mysteriously delayed or canceled. The message was becoming clear. This wasn't just about defending Victoria Reed. It was about making an example of Solomon Washington, showing that even a trillionaire couldn't challenge certain power structures without consequences. What these forces didn't understand was that Solomon hadn't built his empire by backing down from challenges. He had succeeded in business not despite the obstacles placed in his way because of his race, but because those obstacles had forced him to become more strategic, more thorough, and more resilient than his competitors. If someone wanted to use this incident to teach a lesson, they had chosen the wrong opponent. Solomon Washington calmly opened his laptop and began typing an email to his executive team. The subject line read simply, "Comprehensive Response Strategy." The real battle was just beginning. The mahogany-paneled conference room of Whitfield and Associates exuded old money and entrenched power. Victoria Reed sat nervously at the massive table, looking out of place despite her new designer outfit purchased with proceeds from her rapidly growing legal defense fund. James Whitfield adjusted his gold cufflinks as he addressed the assembled team of attorneys and PR specialists. "The wrongful termination suit against Sky Blue is just the beginning," he announced. "We're positioning Ms. Reed as the victim of woke culture and cancel society, a hard-working American woman sacrificed to appease a powerful black man throwing his weight around." Victoria nodded, increasingly comfortable with this narrative that absolved her of any responsibility. "They didn't even give me a chance to tell my side," she added, repeating the talking point she'd been coached on. What she didn't notice was the meaningful glance exchanged between Whitfield and Charlene Davenport, a sharply dressed woman whose family name adorned buildings throughout the city. The Davenports were major shareholders in Pinnacle Technologies, Solomon Washington's chief corporate rival. "Our polling shows significant traction with the reverse racism angle," reported the PR director. "We've got 3 senators already making statements about the dangerous precedent of allowing wealthy individuals to destroy working-class livelihoods over perceived slights." Victoria's lawsuit filed that morning made headlines across all major networks. The complaint painted her as a dedicated professional who had gently redirected an unruly child, only to have her career destroyed by an overreaction driven by racial grievance politics. It demanded $40 million in damages for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. The dollar amount was deliberately provocative, designed to generate maximum outrage. It worked. By lunchtime, conservative commentators were devoting entire segments to the case, framing it as emblematic of everything wrong with modern America. "This is what happens when we elevate people based on identity politics rather than merit," declared one popular pundit. A man becomes a trillionaire through diversity initiatives and government contracts, then uses that power to crush a working-class woman for doing her job. The narrative was as false as it was effective. Solomon Washington had built his fortune through revolutionary technology and business acumen without any government assistance. But the coordinated messaging campaign created an alternative reality that millions of viewers began accepting as truth. Solomon watched these developments with analytical detachment from his home office, where he had gathered a response team of his own. "They're not just defending Victoria Reed," he observed. "They're using this incident to attack the very concept of anti-racism." His general counsel nodded grimly. 6 more contracts canceled this morning, all with companies connected to the Davenport family or their associates. "This is coordinated economic pressure, and the school situation has escalated," added Solomon's chief of staff. Alpine Academy's board voted to suspend Marcus and Zara, pending an investigation into their behavior. 3 other families have withdrawn their children, claiming they don't feel safe. Solomon absorbed this information with the same calm precision that had guided his rise from poverty to unprecedented wealth. Where others might have seen only attacks, he recognized a pattern revealing his opponent's strategy and, more importantly, their vulnerabilities. "They're trying to isolate us socially and economically," he concluded. "Classic tactics against those who challenge entrenched power, but they've made 3 critical errors." He stood and approached the digital whiteboard, where his team had mapped the connections between Victoria Reed, James Whitfield, the Davenport family, and various media outlets amplifying their message. First, they assumed I would respond emotionally rather than strategically. Second, they underestimated how much evidence we already have. And third, he smiled slightly, they forgot to check what other companies I own. Solomon gestured to his chief technology officer. "Activate protocol verification." The CTO nodded and began typing rapidly on his laptop. Within minutes, every major social media platform lit up with authenticated time-stamped video from multiple angles of the entire flight incident, including footage that hadn't previously been public. The videos came with forensic certification of their authenticity, leaving no room for claims of deceptive editing. Simultaneously, Solomon's media company released a special report documenting Victoria Reed's history of customer complaints disproportionately filed by passengers of color. Former Sky Blue employees protected by anonymity described a pattern of similar behavior that had been repeatedly overlooked by management. But Solomon's most effective countermove targeted the financial infrastructure supporting Victoria's campaign. His team had traced the primary funding sources behind her suddenly enormous legal defense fund to shell companies ultimately controlled by the Davenport family and their associates. "Release the financial analysis," Solomon instructed his communications director. Within hours, detailed reports appeared across financial news outlets. Flight attendants' grassroots support revealed as AstroTurf campaign funded by tech rivals family. The articles meticulously documented how the same entities bankrolling Victoria Reed's defense were simultaneously canceling contracts with Washington innovations companies. The coordinated nature of these revelations shifted the narrative dramatically. What had been portrayed as a simple employment dispute was now revealed as a sophisticated attempt by powerful interests to weaponize racism for corporate advantage. Victoria Reed, watching her smartphone notifications explode with this new wave of coverage, turned pale. "They're saying I'm just a pawn," she told Whitfield during an emergency meeting, "that I'm being used by billionaires in some corporate war." Whitfield's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern. "Stay on message," he instructed firmly. "You're the victim here, remember. Washington is just trying to distract from his abuse of power." But the damage control was complicated. The next morning, when an anonymous source leaked emails between Whitfield and Charlene Davenport discussing the need to make an example of Washington and put him back in his place after he had forgotten who really runs things. The racial undertones were unmistakable, and the backlash was swift. 3 senators who had publicly supported Victoria quickly distanced themselves from the case. Her fundraising plateaued as donors questioned whether their contributions were actually supporting a corporate proxy war rather than a wronged employee. Solomon's strategic response had successfully exposed the broader agenda behind Victoria's lawsuit, but his opponents were powerful, entrenched, and unaccustomed to losing. Their counterattack came from an unexpected direction. Marcus, still traumatized by both the original incident and his treatment at school, had been seeing a therapist to process his experiences. After a particularly difficult session, Solomon found his son in tears, clutching his tablet. "What's wrong, buddy?" Solomon asked gently. "The kids at school," Marcus sobbed. "They're saying I lied about everything, that I hit the lady first, and she was just defending herself." Solomon took the tablet and found dozens of cruel messages from Marcus's classmates, clearly pairing language from their parents. The coordinated bullying campaign had moved beyond the adults to target an 8-year-old child already suffering from trauma. For the first time since the incident began, Solomon felt his carefully maintained composure crack. He had faced discrimination throughout his life and career, developing strategies to overcome barriers and succeed despite them. But seeing his children suffer for simply existing in their skin awakened something more primal than his strategic business mind. As he comforted his son, Solomon's phone rang with news that would transform the conflict yet again. His chief security officer's voice was urgent. "Sir, we've traced the source of the emails attacking Marcus. They're coming from inside Alpine Academy's administration building." The realization dawned that this wasn't just about Victoria Reed or even about corporate rivalry. The Davenports and their allies were willing to psychologically torture a child to maintain their position at the top of America's social and economic hierarchy. For people like them, a black trillionaire was an anomaly that threatened the system they had built and benefited from for generations. Solomon Washington had always operated within that system, finding ways to succeed despite its biases. Now he realized the system itself needed to be exposed. With renewed determination, he initiated the next phase of his response, a comprehensive investigation into how deep and wide this network of corruption and racial animus truly extended. What he would uncover would shock even him, a man who thought he understood the true face of American power. Solomon Washington stood in his home command center, surveying the wall of screens displaying the results of his team's investigation into Victoria Reed and her sudden, powerful backing. Each screen told part of a story that was rapidly evolving from a simple case of discrimination into something far more insidious. "Show me Reed's employment history again," Solomon instructed his head of intelligence, Amara Okafor. "Have you ever suspected that what looks like an isolated incident might actually be part of a larger pattern?" Comment number 1 if you've ever witnessed how power protects itself when challenged. If you believe the truth should always come to light, no matter how powerful those involved might be, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story is about to reveal how deep corruption can run when billions of dollars in entrenched privilege are at stake. Amara tapped her tablet, bringing up Victoria Reed's complete employment record obtained through both legal channels and more discreet methods. 22 years at Sky Blue. "But here's where it gets interesting," she explained, highlighting several entries. "We found 17 previous complaints of discriminatory treatment filed against her by passengers of color. Every single one was dismissed or buried." Solomon studied the pattern. Any connection between how these complaints were handled? "All of them were routed to the same HR manager," Amara confirmed, "Walter Davenport, Sr." "Davenport?" Solomon's attention sharpened. "Any relation to Charlene Davenport, her uncle?" "He retired from Sky Blue 3 years ago with a generous package after 40 years in their HR department." The connection was telling, but still didn't explain the massive response to what should have been a straightforward termination for cause. Solomon had faced discrimination throughout his rise from Brooklyn projects to becoming America's first black trillionaire. He developed strategies for navigating and ultimately succeeding despite systemic barriers. But this coordinated attack felt different, more personal, and more dangerous. "Sir," interrupted his chief of security, "we've completed the background. Sweep on James Whitfield." The screen shifted to show Victoria's attorney, a silver-haired man with the polished appearance of old money and establishment connections. His credentials were impressive: Harvard Law, former prosecutor, founding partner of his prestigious firm. But as Solomon's team dug deeper, more troubling connections emerged. Whitfield has represented 14 different corporations in discrimination lawsuits. The security chief explained he specializes in defending companies against racial bias claims. His success rate is nearly perfect, not because he wins in court, but because he's masterful at destroying the credibility of plaintiffs. Before cases ever reach trial, Solomon nodded, pieces beginning to connect. And his connection to hate groups, he's never officially represented them, but he's given speeches at 9 different events hosted by organizations classified as hate groups by the Justice Department, always about free speech and reverse discrimination. He's careful to maintain plausible deniability while signaling his sympathies. The most disturbing revelation came when Solomon's team uncovered financial connections between Whitfield's firm and Pinnacle Technologies. Solomon's chief corporate rival, Pinnacle CEO, Richard Davenport, had personally approved millions in legal fees to Whitfield over the past decade, not for actual legal work, but for vaguely defined consulting services. They're using Victoria Reed, Solomon concluded. She's just a pawn in their game. A willing pawn, Amara noted. The psychological profile suggests she genuinely believes she's the victim here. Her social media history shows a long pattern of racially charged comments and complaints about those people getting special treatment. As Solomon absorbed this information, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a contact at the Federal Trade Commission. 3 of Washington Innovation's pending patents had just been flagged for extended review. A bureaucratic delay tactic that could cost billions in lost market advantage. The timing isn't coincidental, Solomon observed. They're hitting us from multiple angles. His theory was confirmed an hour later when his chief financial officer called with alarming news. Someone's attempting a coordinated short attack on our stock, she reported urgently. Massive sell orders all hitting simultaneously from different firms, but with identical timing. It has to be orchestrated. Solomon remained calm as he watched millions of dollars in company value evaporate on the digital ticker. This wasn't about money for him. He'd built his fortune from nothing once and could do it again if necessary. What troubled him was the realization that America's power structure was willing to mobilize this level of resources to put him in his place for simply standing up against the racial abuse of his child. The most disturbing development came that evening when Solomon's private email server was breached despite world-class security. By morning, selectively edited emails appeared on right-wing news sites purporting to show Solomon planning to play the race card and manufacture a discrimination incident to damage Sky Blue Airlines before a hostile takeover. The emails were sophisticated forgeries containing enough authentic details about Solomon's business to seem plausible while inserting completely fabricated content about the flight incident. The technical sophistication required for such forgeries pointed to resources far beyond what Victoria Reed or even a law firm could access. This is a nation-state level hacking, Solomon's cybersecurity chief confirmed, but deployed for corporate purposes, someone called in serious favors for this. As public opinion began shifting again with these new revelations, Solomon received a call from Thornton, Sky Blue's CEO. The airline executive sounded tense, almost frightened. Solomon, the board is meeting tomorrow to reconsider Reed's termination. He admitted there's enormous pressure to characterize this as a misunderstanding and offer her job back. You have video of her slapping my child? Solomon replied evenly. I know, but Thornton hesitated. Some board members are suggesting the video doesn't show the full context, that maybe Marcus did something to provoke her. He's 8 years old. Richard, I understand that, but several major shareholders are threatening to dump their stock if we don't revise our position. They're saying the company overreacted to protect a powerful client. Solomon recognized the playbook, a deliberate effort to rewrite reality, to make his family the aggressors rather than the victims. To establish that even with a trillion-dollar fortune, a black man challenging racism would face consequences. His corporate board was feeling similar pressures. Later that day, they convened an emergency meeting where several longtime members suggested Solomon should focus on business rather than personal matters and consider a private settlement. To make this go away, we're concerned about shareholder value, explained one board member who had previously been supportive. These distractions are causing material harm to the company. Solomon listened calmly. Let me be very clear. He finally responded, I built this company from nothing. I own controlling interest, and I will burn it to the ground myself before I teach my children that they should accept racial abuse to protect white comfort or corporate profits. The room fell silent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct language about race in their carefully sanitized corporate environment. As the meeting concluded, Solomon received another call, this one from Victoria Reed herself, clearly coached by her legal team. Her offer was both audacious and revealing. She would drop her lawsuit if Solomon publicly apologized for mischaracterizing the incident and admitted to using his influence inappropriately. It's a reasonable compromise, she suggested in a practiced tone. Everyone saves face. Solomon ended the call without responding. The request confirmed what he already suspected. This had never been about Victoria Reed's job. It was about forcing a powerful black man to demonstrate public deference to a white woman, even when she was demonstrably wrong. The symbolic value of such an apology to those who resented his success would be immeasurable. That evening, as Solomon checked on Marcus before bedtime, he found his son staring blankly at the ceiling, unresponsive to questions. The child psychiatrist they consulted confirmed what Solomon feared. The combined trauma of the original assault, the public attacks on his character, and the bullying from classmates had pushed Marcus into an anxiety state requiring immediate intervention. Something shifted in Solomon at that moment. He had spent his career working within the system, finding strategic ways to succeed despite its biases. He had believed that exceptional success would create change by example. Now watching his traumatized child, he recognized the naivety of that belief. No amount of wealth or achievement could protect his family from the fundamental injustices embedded in American society. As he sat beside Marcus's bed, gently holding his son's hand until the child finally fell into troubled sleep, Solomon made a decision. This wasn't just about accountability for one flight attendant anymore. It was about exposing the entire network of power and privilege that had mobilized to protect her. Not because they cared about Victoria Reed, but because they feared the precedent of a black man successfully demanding justice. Solomon Washington had built his fortune by identifying patterns invisible to others. Now he was seeing the most important pattern of all, how America's power structure responded when its racial hierarchies were challenged, and he had the resources to expose it for everyone to see. Little did Solomon know, the evidence that would blow the entire conspiracy wide open was about to come from the most unexpected source imaginable. Would you have continued fighting against such powerful opposition, or would you have taken the reasonable compromise to make the problem go away? What do you think is hidden in the evidence that's about to emerge? The most shocking revelations are yet to come in this tale of corruption, power, and the fight for basic human dignity. Solomon Washington's private phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would let such calls go to screening, but something prompted him to answer directly. It was a decision that would change everything. Mr. Washington, the IB voice was elderly, female, and hesitant. This is Beverly Matthews. I was on your flight with that horrible stewardess. Solomon immediately recalled the kind older woman who had spoken up when no one else would. Mrs. Matthews, thank you for your support that day. It meant a lot to my family. I'm calling because I have something you need to hear, Beverly continued. I always record my flights. It's a habit from when my husband was alive. He was afraid of flying, so I'd record the normal sounds to show him how peaceful it actually was. Solomon straightened immediately, grasping the significance. You have audio of the incident? The entire flight clear as day, including what that woman said when she thought no one could hear her. Beverly's voice hardened. The things she called you and your children when she was in the galley with the other attendants would make a sailor blush. And there's more. She was talking before takeoff about making sure those people had a difficult flight. This was potentially game-changing evidence. While video had captured the physical assault, comprehensive audio revealing premeditated intent to discriminate would destroy Victoria Reed's claim that she had merely reacted to disruptive behavior. Mrs. Matthews, would you be willing to share this recording? That's why I'm calling. My grandson is bringing it over to your office tomorrow morning. I wanted to do the right thing. Solomon thanked her profusely, a weight lifting from his shoulders. With this evidence, Victoria's lawsuit would collapse, and the conspiracy supporting her would lose its central figure. But someone else was apparently monitoring Solomon's calls. At 2:17 a.m., Beverly Matthews' home was broken into. Nothing of value was taken except her smartphone and laptop. The burglars were professional enough to leave no evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA. Nothing that could identify them. Solomon learned of the break-in the next morning from Beverly's distraught grandson, who called from the hospital. They hurt her, Mr. Washington. She tried to stop them from taking her phone, and they pushed her down the stairs. She's in critical condition. The attack on an elderly woman crossed a line Solomon hadn't anticipated. He immediately dispatched his security team to the hospital and arranged for Beverly to receive the best medical care possible. Her grandson, Adam, arrived at Solomon's office later that day, visibly shaken. "Grandma was so upset about what happened to your son," Adam explained. "She kept saying nobody else on that plane had the courage to speak up." "Your grandmother is a hero," Solomon said sincerely, "and I'm deeply sorry she's suffering for doing the right thing." Adam shook his head grimly. "The recording is gone. They took every device she owned." But he hesitated, then continued with a slight smile. "Grandma's more tech-savvy than they realized. She had her cloud backup set to automatic. The recording should still be there." Adam opened his laptop and attempted to access Beverly's cloud account. His expression quickly changed from hope to concern. "That's strange. Her password isn't working." Solomon's cybersecurity chief called in to assist, confirmed the worst. The account has been compromised. Someone with sophisticated tools has taken control and deleted the files. The targeted nature of the attack made it clear Beverly's call to Solomon had been monitored, which meant Solomon's own communications were compromised at a level even his world-class security team hadn't detected. This wasn't the work of overzealous supporters or even a law firm. It required resources only available to the most powerful entities. Solomon immediately implemented emergency security protocols, moving his children to a secure location and switching to communication methods. Even he had considered paranoid until now. As these measures were being implemented, his private investigator uncovered a disturbing connection. Victoria Reed's brother, the investigator reported, is Lawrence Reed, Senior Vice President at Davenport Digital, the cyber warfare division of Pinnacle Technologies. Pinnacle was Solomon's main competitor, but more significantly, it was controlled by the Davenport family, the same family whose members had orchestrated the response to Alpine Academy and funded Victoria's legal defense. Lawrence Reed's position explained how Victoria, a flight attendant of modest means, had suddenly gained access to nation-state-level hacking capabilities and media manipulation. As Solomon processed this information, his security team made another discovery. James Whitfield had represented multiple corporations against racial discrimination claims, but with a particular pattern. His firm had represented 19 different companies in cases involving allegations of racism. The plaintiffs in those cases subsequently experienced mysterious personal and financial problems, job losses, tax audits, family crises, and in 3 cases, criminal charges later proven false. They don't just fight the legal battle, Solomon realized. They destroy anyone who challenges them. Solomon knew he needed to move quickly before this coalition of powerful interests could escalate further. He assigned his most trusted team members to contact other victims of Whitfield's tactics, building a comprehensive picture of the attorney's methodology. Meanwhile, Beverly Matthews' condition stabilized, though she remained unconscious. Solomon arranged for round-the-clock security at her hospital room, concerned her attackers might return to ensure her silence. His caution proved justified when hospital security intercepted an individual with false medical credentials attempting to access her floor. The would-be intruder escaped before police arrived. Solomon was running out of options. The evidence that could exonerate his family and expose the conspiracy had been stolen, and his opponents seemed willing to go to extraordinary lengths to maintain their version of events. Even with his vast resources, Solomon faced an organized network that controlled key institutions, from media outlets to regulatory agencies. As he contemplated his next steps, Zara knocked on his office door. At 12, she already showed the analytical mind that would one day make her a formidable leader in her own right. "Dad," she said without preamble, "I think I know who might have evidence about what really happened." Solomon raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. "Marcus's watch," she explained, "the one Grandma gave him for his birthday. It has that emergency recording feature that activates when heart rate spikes. Marcus was wearing it on the plane." Solomon felt a glimmer of hope. The child's smartwatch had been designed with safety features to activate during emergencies, capturing audio and location data. If it had triggered during Victoria's assault, It might have recorded crucial evidence. They found Marcus in the secure residence's game room, still subdued, but showing small signs of recovery. When asked about his watch, he nodded. It buzzed when the mean lady hit me. I saw the red light. Solomon gently retrieved the watch, which his security team confirmed had not been connected to compromised networks. The recording was still intact, capturing not just the slap but the crucial moments before it, when Victoria could clearly be heard making racially charged comments and discussing with another crew member how they would make sure these people know their place. It wasn't as comprehensive as Beverly's recording, but it was damning nonetheless. And more importantly, it was secure. Solomon immediately transferred the data to protected servers and prepared to counterattack. What he didn't realize was that this evidence was just the tip of a much larger iceberg that would soon be revealed. Solomon Washington straightened his tie as he prepared to face the Washington Innovations Board of Directors. Despite founding the company and maintaining majority ownership, he knew several board members had been pressured to support a motion, forcing him to step back from day-to-day operations until the personal matter with Victoria Reed was resolved. The boardroom was tense as Solomon entered, members avoiding his gaze. Corporate attorney Caroline Miller opened the proceedings with practiced neutrality. We're here to discuss concerns about recent events affecting company valuation and reputation. Several members have proposed a temporary leadership transition to address these challenges. Solomon noted which board members wouldn't meet his eyes, mentally cataloging the ones who'd clearly been compromised. He was about to respond when his phone vibrated with an urgent message from Zara. Stall the meeting. Amy Matthews trying to reach you says it's life or death. Before we proceed, Solomon said smoothly, I'd like to request a 30-minute recess to review some relevant documents that just arrived. The board chair reluctantly agreed. Solomon stepped out immediately, calling the number Zara had forwarded. Amy Matthews, Beverly's granddaughter, answered on the first ring, her voice breathless with urgency. Mr. Washington, Grandma had a backup. She always kept copies of important things in multiple places. There's another recording in her safety deposit box. I have access, but I need help getting it. Someone's following me. Solomon dispatched his security team to escort Amy safely to the bank. As they waited for confirmation, he reflected on how quickly this had escalated from a single incident of discrimination to what increasingly appeared to be a vast conspiracy involving corporate rivals, media manipulation, and potentially criminal actions. His security chief called back 20 minutes later. Sir, we secured the drive. Ms. Matthews is safe. The recording is intact, but there's something you need to know. It contains much more than just the flight incident. What do you mean? Beverly Matthews didn't just record the flight. She accidentally left her recorder running during the Denver stopover. It captured a conversation between Victoria Reed and Michael Pierce in the terminal, discussing instructions they'd received before the flight. The implications were staggering. If true, this would prove the discrimination wasn't spontaneous, but premeditated, potentially orchestrated by the same interests now attacking Solomon's business. Get it authenticated immediately, Solomon instructed, then prepare it for presentation. As Solomon returned to the boardroom, he found the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Board member Thomas Harrington, previously one of his strongest supporters, was now sitting beside the chairman, engaged in what appeared to be a persuasive conversation. When Solomon entered, Harrington glanced up with an expression that could only be described as regretful determination. The meeting resumed with Chairman Williams addressing Solomon directly. While we respect your contributions to this company, the board feels the current situation requires undivided leadership. Mr. Harrington has proposed a temporary transfer of operational control to the executive committee until personal matters are resolved. Solomon noted that Harrington couldn't meet his gaze. A man he'd known for 15 years who had been with the company since its earliest days was now leading the effort to remove him. This wasn't just business. It was personal betrayal. Before we vote, Solomon said calmly, I'd like to present new evidence directly relevant to these concerns. He connected his phone to the room's display system, prepared to play the critical portions of Beverly's recording, only to find the connection failing repeatedly. The chairman smiled thinly. Perhaps technological issues are another sign that new leadership is needed. Solomon recognized the sabotage for what it was they had, anticipated his move, and taken countermeasures. As the board prepared to vote, the doors to the boardroom burst open. Marcus Washington walked in, escorted by Solomon's chief of staff. "Marcus, this isn't appropriate," Solomon began, concerned for his son's well-being. But the 8-year-old walked directly to his father with surprising determination. "Dad, I recorded it too," he said, holding up his smartwatch. "Not just on the plane. Yesterday too, when Mr. Harrington was talking to the scary lawyer man about making you leave your company." The boardroom fell silent. Harrington's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. The boy's obviously confused. Marcus, finding courage despite his recent trauma, connected his watch to the display system himself, navigating the interface with the ease of a child raised in the digital age. Unlike Solomon's compromised devices, the watch connected instantly. The recording was crystal clear. Thomas Harrington's voice was unmistakable as he spoke with James Whitfield. "Washington is too powerful. He's forgotten his place. The board vote is arranged. He'll be out by noon tomorrow." Whitfield's response was even more damning. "Good. Once he's isolated, we move to phase 2. The Davenports are prepared to acquire controlling interest at the depressed valuation. The consortium agrees this is necessary. Victoria Reed was just the beginning. We need to make an example of him. But it was the next section that transformed the case from corporate intrigue to explicit conspiracy. The black billionaire problem," Harrington said, "is that they don't understand the natural order. Washington needs to learn there are consequences for challenging the system that made America great." As the recording continued, revealing names, dates, and explicit references to using Victoria Reed as a pawn in a larger strategy to put Washington back in his place, board members exchanged shocked glances. Several physically distanced themselves from Harrington, who had collapsed into his chair, all pretense abandoned. Solomon looked at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "Marcus, when did you record this?" "When you took me to your office yesterday," Marcus explained. "Mr. Harrington didn't see me in the little room next to your conference room. My watch started recording when he said mean things about us." The child's innocent action, capturing what sophisticated security systems had missed, had exposed the entire conspiracy. The board meeting quickly transformed from an attempt to remove Solomon to an emergency session addressing Harrington's breach of fiduciary duty. As security escorted the disgraced board member from the building, Solomon's phone lit up with an urgent alert. Victoria Reed was attempting to flee the country on a private jet registered to Davenport Holdings. Simultaneously, unusual account activity suggested the conspirators were implementing some kind of scorched earth contingency plan, massive data transfers, and deletion attempts across systems connected to both Washington Innovations and the Davenport corporate network. "They're trying to destroy the evidence." Solomon's cybersecurity chief reported, "This is a sophisticated attack attempting to corrupt all our systems simultaneously." Solomon smiled for the first time in days. "Let them try. We've been running Shadow Protocol since Beverly's home was invaded. Shadow Protocol was Solomon's proprietary contingency system developed after previous corporate espionage attempts. It created secure, isolated backups of all critical data on servers physically disconnected from any network. A digital fortress impervious to even the most sophisticated cyber attacks. As the attack failed to achieve its objectives, federal authorities, acting on evidence provided by Solomon's team, raided offices connected to Whitfield's firm and Davenport subsidiary companies. The coordinated operation caught several key conspirators in the act of destroying evidence, adding obstruction of justice to the growing list of charges. Victoria Reed, apprehended at the airport, quickly recognized her position as the most exposed member of the conspiracy. "I want immunity," she demanded when questioned by federal agents. "I'll tell you everything about the Davenports, about Whitfield, about how they orchestrated the whole thing." But Solomon, when consulted by the lead investigator, was firm. No deals. Everyone involved should face the full consequences of their actions, including Victoria Reed. "She wasn't forced to strike my child. That was her choice." As night fell, Solomon returned home to his children, finding Marcus playing video games with something approaching his previous enthusiasm. The boy was resilient, beginning to recover now that the threats were receding. Zara sat nearby, reading legal briefs about the case with the intensity that reminded Solomon so much of himself. "Is it over, Dad?" Marcus asked, looking up from his game. Solomon considered the question carefully. The immediate danger had passed. The conspiracy was exposed, its key members facing both civil and criminal charges. But the underlying issues, the entrenched power structures that viewed black success as a threat to be neutralized, those remained. The worst is over. Solomon answered truthfully, but the real work is just beginning. He thought about how a simple act of standing up against discrimination had revealed a vast network of corruption and racial animus, reaching into the highest levels of American business and politics. It wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about a system that reflexively mobilized to protect white privilege whenever it was challenged. Solomon's phone buzzed with news that Michael Pierce, the lead flight attendant who had enabled Victoria's behavior, was offering to testify against the larger conspiracy in exchange for leniency. Like rats fleeing a sinking ship, the coalition assembled against Washington was rapidly disintegrating. What none of them understood was that Solomon Washington hadn't built a trillion-dollar empire by seeking revenge. He had succeeded by transforming challenges into opportunities. And the opportunity before him now was unprecedented, the chance to expose and dismantle systemic discrimination at its source. As his children drifted off to sleep, Solomon began formulating not just his legal strategy for the coming days, but his vision for fundamental change. This incident, painful as it had been for his family, had provided a unique window into how power operated in America, and Solomon Washington had never been one to waste an opportunity. The federal courthouse buzzed with unprecedented security as black SUVs delivered key figures in what the media now called the Reed conspiracy. Victoria Reed, once the central figure, had been reduced to a minor player as the investigation revealed the vast network that had used her as its public face. She hurried up the courthouse steps, flanked by new attorneys, her original counsel, having abandoned her after their own complicity was exposed. Gone was the designer wardrobe and polished appearance from her media appearances, replaced by a simple suit that reflected her diminished circumstances. "M. Reed, do you regret striking Marcus Washington?" shouted a reporter. Victoria ignored the question, but her expression revealed the dawning realization of her position. The powerful interests that had promised to protect her were now scrambling to save themselves, leaving her exposed to the full consequences of her actions. Inside, Solomon Washington conferred quietly with federal prosecutors, reviewing evidence from the comprehensive investigation his team had enabled. What had begun as a simple case of a flight attendant's discriminatory behavior had revealed a complex web of corporate corruption, targeted harassment, and conspiracy reaching into multiple industries. "The Davenport family has requested a private meeting," one prosecutor informed Solomon. "They're offering to settle all claims and provide compensatory damages if you'll agree to sealed records." Solomon shook his head. "No private settlements, no sealed records. The public deserves to know exactly how these systems operate." His refusal to accept confidential settlements had become a cornerstone of his strategy, not out of vindictiveness, but because meaningful change required transparency. Each attempt to buy silence only strengthened his resolve. As proceedings began, Victoria Reed's new legal team attempted a desperate maneuver, offering her full testimony against the true masterminds in exchange for immunity. Judge Rosario, reviewing the extensive evidence already in hand, denied the request. "Ms. Reed," the judge stated firmly, "your willing participation in discrimination and physical assault of a minor, followed by your prominent role in the subsequent defamation campaign, disqualifies you from consideration for immunity. The court acknowledges you were not the architect of the larger conspiracy, but you were an enthusiastic participant, not a victim." Victoria slumped in her chair as the reality of her situation finally sank in. The powerful allies who had promised to protect her were now themselves fighting for survival, their resources directed toward their own defense rather than hers. Outside the courthouse, James Whitfield held an impromptu press conference attempting to distance himself from his former clients. "I was misled about the nature of Ms. Reed's case," he claimed to skeptical reporters. "My firm had no knowledge of any coordination between the Davenports and other entities. His performance might have been more convincing had federal agents not chosen that precise moment to serve him with additional warrants based on evidence discovered in morning raids." The attorney's expression as he was escorted to a waiting vehicle was captured by dozens of cameras, becoming an iconic image of the unfolding scandal. Back in the courtroom, Solomon observed the proceedings with analytical detachment. His focus had shifted from the immediate case to the structural issues it had exposed. Each revelation further confirmed his growing certainty that the incident on that flight had merely been a symptom of much deeper problems in how American institutions responded when traditionally marginalized people achieved positions of genuine power. During a recess, Solomon received an urgent call from the hospital. Beverly Matthews had regained consciousness. Despite her fragile condition, she was insisting on providing formal testimony. Against medical advice, but with Beverly's determined consent, arrangements were made for her to testify via secure video link. When the elderly woman's face appeared on the courtroom screens, a hush fell over the proceedings. The contrast between the frail grandmother in a hospital bed and the powerful interests arrayed against her could not have been more stark. "I may be old," Beverly began, her voice weak but resolute, "but I was raised to know right from wrong. What that woman did to that child was wrong. What those people did afterward, trying to blame the victim and attack a family for standing up for themselves, was wrong. I'm here because somebody needs to say that out loud." Her testimony, delivered with moral clarity that cut through the legal complexities, provided the emotional core of the case. Beverly described not just the specific incident she had witnessed and recorded, but the broader pattern of discriminatory behavior throughout the flight, painting a comprehensive picture of premeditated bias rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. The courtroom fell silent when Beverly addressed Victoria directly. "Young lady, I was there. I saw what you did. No amount of money or powerful friends can change that truth. That little boy deserved better from you, and you know it." Victoria Reed, who had maintained a facade of indignant victimhood throughout. Proceedings finally broke down at these words from a witness whose moral authority was unimpeachable. For the first time, genuine remorse seemed to crack through her carefully constructed narrative. As Beverly's testimony concluded, Solomon's security chief passed him an urgent note. "Massive cyber attack in progress against all Washington companies. Different signature than previous attempts, much more sophisticated." Solomon excused himself briefly to address the situation, connecting with his cybersecurity team via secure channel. "They're trying to wipe everything," his chief technology officer reported, "not just our evidence, but our entire digital infrastructure. This is beyond corporate espionage. This is scorched earth. Where's it coming from? Multiple points of origin, but primary control appears to be routing through servers owned by a Davenport subsidiary. They're getting desperate." Solomon smiled slightly. "Activate Contingency Omega." Contingency Omega, unknown even to most of his executive team, was Solomon's final defensive measure. A complete mirror of all Washington enterprise data maintained on isolated quantum encrypted servers in 3 different countries, updated in real time, but physically disconnected from any attackable network. The system had cost billions to develop and maintain a paranoid precaution until this very moment. "All systems preserved, sir," came the confirmation minutes later, "and we've captured the attack signatures. They're distinctive. Forensics indicates government-grade tools being deployed for private purposes. Forward everything to the FBI's Cybercrime Division." Solomon instructed full cooperation, no redactions. As he returned to the courtroom, Solomon found proceedings had taken a dramatic turn. Michael Pierce, the lead flight attendant who had enabled Victoria's behavior, had arrived with his own attorneys, requesting to provide immediate testimony in exchange for consideration during sentencing. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Rosario addressed him sternly, "you understand you're waiving certain rights by coming forward like this?" "I do, Your Honor," Pice replied, visibly nervous. "But I can't be part of this anymore. I was supposed to meet Mr. Washington to tell him everything, but they got to me first. They threatened my family." Pierce's testimony proved explosive, detailing not just the events of the flight, but the preparation beforehand. He described a call he'd received from Victoria the night before, explaining that she had special instructions regarding the Washington family. "She told me they needed to be put in their place." Pice testified that people like Solomon Washington forget they're still just, I won't repeat the word she used. She said we'd be protected, that powerful people would make sure nothing happened to us no matter what we did. "And you agreed to this?" the prosecutor asked. "I didn't agree to hitting a child," Pice clarified. "But yes, I agreed to make their flight difficult. It was wrong. I've always prided myself on professionalism, but the truth is I resented Washington's success." Victoria played into that resentment. She knew exactly what buttons to push. As Pice detailed the extent of his involvement and what he knew about the broader conspiracy, Solomon received another update. His security team had intercepted communications, suggesting Victoria's backers were implementing some kind of final solution to eliminate all evidence. The nature of this solution became clear when federal agents acting on Solomon's information discovered explosives in the server facility housing backup evidence. The attempted sabotage confirmed what Solomon had suspected. This was never just about one incident of discrimination or even corporate rivalry. It was about maintaining a system of power that viewed certain people's success as a fundamental threat to the established order. As day 12 of the hearings concluded, the conspiracy was collapsing from within. Victoria Reed, abandoned by her powerful sponsors and facing both civil and criminal charges, made a final desperate offer to tell everything. Solomon, consulting with prosecutors, maintained his position. No deals for the woman who had struck his child. The Davenport family, seeing their carefully constructed defenses crumbling, attempted to flee the country on their private jet, only to find federal agents waiting at the airport. The scene of America's wealthiest family being escorted into federal vehicles became an indelible image in the unfolding drama. That evening, as Solomon checked on his children, he found Marcus sleeping peacefully for the first time since the incident. The boy had shown remarkable resilience, his natural exuberance gradually returning as he witnessed justice being served. Zara sat nearby working on what appeared to be a complex flowchart. "What are you mapping?" Solomon asked his daughter. "The system," she replied simply. "How all of this fits together. It's not just about Victoria Reed or even the Davenports. It's about how power protects itself." Solomon nodded, impressed by his daughter's insight. At 12 years old, she understood something that had taken him decades to fully comprehend. Individual incidents of discrimination were merely symptoms of deeper structural issues. As he looked at Zara's diagram, Solomon reflected on the extraordinary chain of events triggered by his simple refusal to let racial abuse go unchallenged. What had begun as a personal stand for his family's dignity had exposed corruption reaching into the highest levels of corporate America and beyond. The conspiracy was collapsing. But Solomon Washington knew the real work was just beginning. The systems that had enabled this coordinated attack remained largely intact. Even as their current operators face consequences, transforming those systems would require more than just winning the current battle. As he updated his own strategic planning documents, Solomon added a new initiative with a simple title: Structural Reform. The scope of this project extended far beyond his personal vindication. It aimed at the heart of how power operated in America. The challenge was immense, but Solomon Washington had never been one to shy away from transformative possibilities. The next morning would bring the final day of testimony, but the true impact of this case was just beginning to unfold across boardrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms throughout the country. 6 months after Victoria Reed's hand struck Marcus Washington's cheek at 30,000 FT, the federal courthouse was packed for the final day of sentencing hearings. The case had expanded far beyond its origins, revealing a network of corruption that had shocked even the most cynical observers of American power. Beverly Matthews, now recovered enough to attend in person, sat in the front row beside Solomon and his children. At 82, she had become an unexpected icon of moral courage. Her simple act of recording a flight and then standing firm against intimidation had helped expose a conspiracy, reaching into the highest echelons of corporate America. The defendants have been found guilty of charges including conspiracy, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, cybercrime, and civil rights violations. Judge Rosario summarized, "This court must now determine appropriate sentences reflecting both the individual actions and the coordinated nature of these offenses." Victoria Reed sat alone at the defense table, abandoned by her former powerful allies. The evidence against her had proven overwhelming. Not just the videos of her assaulting Marcus, but her documented history of discriminatory behavior and her willing participation in the subsequent defamation campaign against the Washington family. Ms. Reed, the judge addressed her directly, while evidence suggests you were not the architect of the larger conspiracy, you were its willing catalyst. Your decision to physically strike a child in your care, followed by your enthusiastic participation in efforts to blame that child and his family, reflect a profound moral failure that this court cannot overlook. Victoria, no longer the defiant figure from early proceedings, nodded slightly. The months of testimony had stripped away her rationalizations, leaving her face to face with the reality of her actions. I hereby sentence you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release and 2,000 hours of community service, specifically working with organizations promoting racial justice and children's welfare. As Victoria was led away, Solomon felt no satisfaction, only a sense that accountability, while necessary, was merely the beginning of a much longer journey. His focus had already shifted to the structural changes needed to prevent similar abuses of power. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Solomon emerged with his family and legal team. Rather than the standard celebratory press conference expected after such a victory, Solomon had prepared something different. "Today isn't about punishment," he began, cameras capturing every word. "It's about transformation. What happened to my family? Revealed something broken in our systems? Not just one flight attendant's bias, but how power mobilizes to protect privilege when challenged." Solomon unveiled the initiative he had been developing during the months of legal proceedings, the Washington Accountability Project, a billion-dollar commitment to combating systemic discrimination across American institutions. "We will fund legal support for victims of discrimination who lack resources to seek justice," he explained. "We will investigate corporate cultures that enable bias, and we will develop new technologies to document and address disparities in treatment across race, gender, and other dimensions." As Solomon outlined the comprehensive approach, industry analysts were already calculating its potential impact. With his resources and strategic vision now focused on institutional reform, traditional centers of power that had long operated with impunity faced unprecedented scrutiny. 3 weeks later, Solomon Washington walked into the executive offices of Sky Blue Airlines. The company had been devastated by the scandal, its stock price plummeting as the extent of institutional discrimination within its ranks was exposed. CEO Richard Thornton had resigned along with most of the board of directors. Mr. Washington, the receptionist, greeted him with visible nervousness. "The interim management team is waiting for you." The tension in the boardroom was palpable. As Solomon entered, the executives had been summoned without explanation, many assuming this was a prelude to devastating litigation that would finish the already struggling airline. "Ladies and gentlemen," Solomon began, "you're wondering why I've asked to meet with you today." He placed a document on the table. "This is confirmation of my investment firm's acquisition of controlling interest in Sky Blue Airlines, completed this morning." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Solomon raised a hand for silence. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because this company now has an opportunity to become a model for transformation. Sky Blue will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols in the airline industry, not because of litigation or regulation, but because it makes business sense to treat all customers with dignity." Over the following months, Sky Blue underwent a remarkable transformation. Solomon appointed a diverse leadership team tasked with rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up. New training programs, accountability systems, and transparent reporting mechanisms were implemented across all levels of the organization. Most significantly, Solomon worked with Marcus to develop an innovation that would ultimately transform the industry: the Young Traveler's Voice System, allowing children to easily and securely report mistreatment during flights. The program, initially launched on Skyloo, was eventually adopted by airlines worldwide after proving both effective and economically beneficial in reducing incidents and increasing customer loyalty. Marcus, now 9 years old, had recovered from his trauma with the resilience of childhood, though the experience had left him more thoughtful, more aware of injustice around him. At the launch event for Young Traveler's Voice, he spoke briefly but powerfully about the importance of listening to children's experiences. "Sometimes grown-ups don't believe kids when we tell them something bad happened," he said simply. "This helps make sure we're heard." Zara, meanwhile, had taken her initial analysis of power structures and expanded it into a comprehensive research project, working with sociologists from top universities to map how discrimination complaints were traditionally handled across different industries. At 13, she was already showing the analytical brilliance and moral clarity that suggested she might one day eclipse even her father's accomplishments. As for Beverly Matthews, she had become something of a celebrity, her straightforward moral courage resonating across generational and political lines. She used her platform to speak about the responsibility of bystanders, often telling audiences, "You don't have to be powerful to stand up for what's right. You just have to be present and willing." 1 year to the day after Victoria Reed's hand struck Marcus Washington's face, Solomon stood at the window of his office, watching the transformation he had set in motion continue to unfold. Sky Blue Airlines, once a symbol of institutional discrimination, was now leading the industry in equity initiatives. The Washington Accountability Project had already taken on cases that promised to transform practices in healthcare, education, and housing. The conspiracy that had mobilized against his family had been powerful, but it had ultimately failed because it underestimated both Solomon's strategic brilliance and the power of simple moral clarity. Victoria Reed and her powerful backers had assumed their positions of privilege were unassailable, that the system would automatically protect them even when they were clearly wrong. Solomon's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. A newly hired Sky Blue flight attendant had just prevented a similar incident on a flight from Chicago, intervening when another crew member showed discriminatory behavior toward a young passenger of color. The new systems were working. As Solomon prepared to leave for the day, Marcus burst into his office, excited about his upcoming school presentation. The boy was attending a new school now, one that had embraced the Washington family and used the case as an opportunity to educate students about bias and moral courage. "Dad, I finished my project," Marcus announced proudly. "It's about Grandma Matthews and how one person can change everything." Solomon smiled, recognizing a profound truth in his son's simple characterization. Beverly Matthews had indeed changed everything, not through wealth or power, but through the simple act of bearing witness and refusing to stay silent. As father and son walked through the office together, Solomon glanced at a monitor showing a new Sky Blue Airlines advertisement. A diverse group of flight attendants welcoming passengers of all backgrounds with the tagline, "Everyone belongs in the sky." It was a small symbol of the changes rippling outward from that single moment of confrontation at 30,000 pounds. Solomon knew the work of transformation was far from complete. The systems that had enabled Victoria Reed and protected her powerful backers remained embedded in American institutions. Changing them would require sustained effort across generations. But as he watched his children growing into their own sense of purpose and witness, he felt something he had rarely permitted himself during his rise to unprecedented success: genuine hope. The Washington family entered their waiting car, heading home through a world that, while still deeply flawed, had been nudged toward accountability by their refusal to accept injustice. In the distance, a Sky Blue airliner climbed into the evening sky, carrying with it not just passengers, but the possibility of a more just future taking flight. The story of Solomon Washington and his family teaches us powerful lessons about courage, accountability, and systemic change. When faced with blatant discrimination, Solomon didn't just seek personal justice. He recognized the deeper patterns of institutional protection that enable such behavior to persist. His strategic response transformed an individual incident into a catalyst for widespread reform. We learned that true power lies not just in wealth or position, but in moral clarity and strategic action. Beverly Matthews, an elderly woman with no special resources, changed everything through her simple commitment to doing what was right. Her courage reminds us that witnesses to injustice have a crucial role to play. Silence perpetuates discrimination, while speaking up can spark transformation. The story also reveals how systems of privilege mobilize to protect themselves when challenged. The coordinated campaign against Solomon exposed how deeply entrenched discriminatory attitudes remain, even in our supposedly progressive society. Those who benefit from existing power structures will often go to extraordinary lengths to maintain them. Perhaps most importantly, This story teaches us that meaningful change requires both accountability for individual actions and transformation of underlying systems. Victoria Reed needed to face consequences for her behavior, but true justice demanded addressing the institutional cultures that enabled and protected her. Finally, we see that children like Marcus and Zara understand more than we often credit. By involving them in creating solutions, Solomon ensured the next generation would be better equipped to recognize and dismantle discriminatory systems. Real change isn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating new structures that make such behavior unacceptable in the first place. What would you have done if you witnessed what Beverly Matthews saw on that flight? Would you have spoken up or remained silent like most passengers? Comment below with courage if you believe in standing up against injustice even when it's difficult. Has discrimination touched your life or someone you know? Share your experiences and how you responded. Your story might give others the strength they need to speak up next time. If you believe in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of their race or background, hit that subscribe button and join our community dedicated to sharing real stories that challenge us to be better. Like this video to help spread this important message to others who need to hear it. Thank you for listening to this story of courage, accountability, and transformation. May we all find the strength to stand up for what's right, even when powerful forces push back. Remember, as Solomon Washington learned, real change begins with refusing to accept injustice, no matter how normalized it might be.